hand over to David. Thanks all.
Thanks, Faye. Yeah, so if everyone can just put their microphones on mute for now, that'd be great. So firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of their evening for what is probably yet another online meeting for everyone, especially on such a beautiful day like this. And while the government hasn't yet, or while the lockdown measures are in place, it seems likely that we'll continue to use, online platforms like this for the foreseeable future. I'd like to thank our speakers, to John for once again agreeing to outline council plans in a public forum like this, and also to his colleagues for helping to run the event online and setting it up. While we've got some kind of big ideas for climate action, we think Coventry Green New Deal public forums like this are really important, and we really welcome the council's willingness to engage in these Q&As, so I hope that they continue. I'd also like to thank our new Bicycle Mayor Adam Tranter for speaking in a minute. I'm going to let Adam introduce himself and what his role entails, and also defer to his superior experience and knowledge when it comes to specific cycle proposals and active travel in Coventry. But on behalf of Coventry Green New Deal, I want to say it's fantastic to have a strong advocate like Adam for active travel in the city, and we look forward to working with him in the future. So before I briefly introduce Coventry Green New Deal and our new manifesto, I'll just repeat some of the things that Faye said. If everyone can keep their microphones on mute and send questions via the text function. What we'll do, like we did last time, is I'll try and summarise and collate some of the questions or themes that come out in those questions and ask John or Adam or both on behalf of participants. And then also, if you send all the questions you have, like Faye said, we can then collate them, and John and his colleagues have kindly said that they'll follow up afterwards, and did so in the last meeting quite extensively actually, so that was really good. So don't feel like, if your question doesn't come up in the meeting that it won't get answered, because hopefully it will. So by way of introduction, all I really want to say, I want to keep it really brief, is that active travel, so cycling and walking, is for us not just an important way to improve our physical and mental health, but also a crucial aspect of reducing our carbon footprint, which we need to get down to net zero as soon as possible to minimise the impact of climate change. Making Coventry into a cycle city has proven to be one of the most popular suggestions of our post-lockdown climate manifesto, 10 proposals for a green reset in Coventry, which we launched a couple of weeks ago, and which I'll post in the text box in a minute for everyone to have a look at in their own time, if you haven't seen it already. As the manifesto points out, active travel is just one part of what we think needs to be an ambitious and far-reaching plan for decarbonisation in the city, a plan which must also involve, amongst many other things, the electrification of other modes of transport, such as cars, freight and public transport. But we also have to recognise the barriers to making Coventry a cycle city. So it's not just the hills and the physical challenges of creating safe and appealing cycle routes, something that Adam and John will hopefully go into more detail about, but also the cultural, social and economic factors that discourage cycling. Unfortunately, cycling is currently predominantly a white middle-class mode of transport. Black and ethnic minority groups, women, people from deprived neighbourhoods, those with disabilities, older people, all, for example, are typically underrepresented in the cycle community. The growing anger at and awareness of institutional racism since the murder of George Floyd reminds us that such barriers are often invisible, and that it is our collective responsibility to search out and address these barriers wherever and whenever we can. So we think we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in this post-lockdown period to set an example to the rest of the UK and to the world of what a green and healthy city can look like, and how to make policy as if people and the environment really matter. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to Adam now who will hopefully talk a bit about his own suggestions for active travel. And then we'll hear from John Seddon, Head of Transport Council. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, David. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks to David for inviting me. Also like to thank John Seddon, Richard Smith and his colleagues from the first day that I started doing this. They've been really helpful and proactive in answering any questions and queries and kind of taking on board the ideas that I have, and I think that's a key part of it. No single one body is going to change active travel in Coventry or in this country, and a real kind of joined up approach is needed. So we all need to work together, and I've got some ideas on that. So just as a kind of way of introduction, really, I'll start by explaining what a bicycle mayor
is now joining.
What a bicycle mayor is, and a bicycle mayor is a kind of role that's been created around the world. There's 150 bicycle mayors globally, and they are effectively champions for cycling in their specific locations, to work independently but work with all key stakeholders to try and drive change. They're politically neutral, and like many of us in this space, they are volunteers. I was the first bicycle mayor in a UK city. I'm the second in the UK, but as I said, there are 150 from Madrid to Mumbai, and they take on a variety of different ways of approaching things. I've worked with a bicycle mayor in Paris who is very focused on the youth community and making cycling as diverse as possible, and really on a grassroots movement. I also work with bicycle mayor, the one in Dublin, for example, is actually a city councillor who has the support of the government to do that job. And the original bicycle mayor was from Amsterdam, as most of these progressive things are, and they liked it so much that they actually funded the bicycle mayor scheme globally. So the scheme runs thanks to the Amsterdam city government, and has been able to kind of expand globally to spread the word of cycling. I'm personally, I'm from Coventry. I born and grew up in Tile Hill. My day job is as CEO of a company called Fusion Media, and we help communicate cycling. So my day job is promoting cycling, and that started with about 12 years ago with making cycling more appealing, more interesting for, as David said, typically white middle-class men wearing lycra, and that's fine, and in some in the UK, that's in some courses that's what cycling is seen as, but increasingly over the last couple of years I've been fascinated by the power for social mobility with the humble bicycle. And when I went to the Netherlands to talk to the bicycle mayors and the city government there to talk and to learn more, they were fascinated that the bicycle, the bicycle they all ride in Amsterdam, of which there are more bikes than people, was designed here in Coventry and was created here in Coventry. We've developed bikes time and time again to now drop handlebars, all sorts of different types of bikes, but the good old-fashioned bicycle, the safety bicycle, is the most popular design in the Netherlands, and that is interesting because it shows that cycling is for everybody. People aren't wearing special clothes, they aren't wearing special protective equipment for urban warfare. They are dressed for their destination, not for their journey, and they are using their bike for short, normal journeys, going to the shops, going to the school, going to work, and things like that. And that's the kind of cycling revolution that I would like to see in Coventry, but also around the country. And I just believe that this incredibly simple tool can really help have a massive impact into some of society's issues. We're obviously talking about climate change here with the Green New Deal, something I think about a lot, but I also think about air quality and air pollution. I think about the 33% of Coventry residents who don't have access to a car. I think of the people who would like to make a positive change for freedom, for happiness, for physical health, for mental health. And I think about what our city could be if we make cycling a bit easier. And through my background, I guess the Bicycle Mayor being an independent and voluntary role, the goal that I bring to, or the approach that I bring to this is to try and use some of the relationships and ways that I've worked in business to build relationships with the council and build relationships with other key stakeholders, because as I say, we have to do this all together. So when I'm working in my day job, it's all about collaboration, and it's all about having a good communication. So I think, I've seen nearby in Warwickshire, temporary measures going up at the moment, and they've not properly, or in my view, well communicated the benefits to people of those things. They're not talking about how easier it will make people's lives, or how nice it will make people's shopping experience by making it pedestrianised. They are talking about what they are taking away. And my job in communication is to try and sell those benefits and to promote those benefits. I believe that, cycling is the best tool for the job. Here in Coventry and around England, 68% of all journeys are under 5 miles, which, for most people is a 30-minute cycle, and a quarter of all journeys are under 1 mile. So I am not one of those people that are saying cycling is for everyone and you must cycle, and if you don't cycle, you're doing wrong. But cycling is a great option for lots of people to do lots of normal things. When you talk to people about cycling, they talk about safety, and there was a chat with Rich Brown just before his call, people saying my experience of cycling is this, and lots of people have their own experience, and cycling is statistically safe, which is the good news. It's according to latest DFT data, it's statistically safer than walking per kilometre travelled. But that doesn't mean that it feels safe, which is why only 2% of people ride bikes, and only 2% of people have ridden bikes for the last 20 years. That figure has never moved over the last 20 years. So we need to make it feel safe, and we need to do that by making the experience much better. I liken it to a roller coaster. Ultimately, roller coasters are statistically safe. Nothing wrong happens often. When you hear about it, everyone talks about it, and it feels pretty scary. And you'd be hard pushed to get your mum or dad or your gran to go down the shops on a roller coaster. It's not something that most people will do. However, there is a community of people who love it and will talk about how great it is, and that's fine. But what we really need is infrastructure, and what we really need is genuine change so that people can ride bikes, and that will normalise cycling. That will bring it into a much wider audience. It's about, for me, using the right tool for the job. And I think in Coventry particularly, one thing I am concerned about, and generally, is the West Midlands is famous for its motor heritage, which obviously stemmed from the humble bicycle to start with. And hearing the narrative in the last couple of weeks from the Metro Mayor Andy Street, it's all about the recovery of the motor industry. And while I welcome electric vehicles as part of the solution, of course, we know that Coventry in many places has a chronic congestion problem. So e-congestion will be no better than congestion. It won't solve certain issues that we will just never be able to get over unless we drive modal share. So I'm really keen. I'm supportive of light rail. I'm very supportive. I think light rail is brilliant. Devil's in the detail, but I think conceptually, I'm really supportive of public transport. I'm supportive of electric vehicles over combustion engine vehicles, but we need to ensure that there's a genuine choice. And I guess just to come on to the kind of key asks that I have, and to wrap up my introduction, we need to ensure that there is a genuine choice. And I'm pleased that at the moment, I said it last week publicly, we're in a position where, for potentially the first time that I've seen, and first time that many others have seen, there is starting to be a simultaneously coordinated plan for cycling that could end up, if followed through, building a network. And that's come from support from central government. They are They are not beyond reproach. They have not funded cycling properly for many years, and the funding that they have, you'll have seen in all the media briefings. Many councils have not received that funding yet from central government. So there is a disparity between what is said and what is done on a national level. And I also think, you know, that is meaning that on a local level, change is not as quickly as we would like. That said, we have the Coundon Cycleway, which I'm delighted is getting significant support. Despite what you might read, there is a petition of double the amount of the naysayers, and also the Binley cycle route is being brought forward. And I've had some active travel independent specialists look at the Coundon scheme, and they have some feedback, of course, but they think it's a brilliant scheme that really challenges the status quo. It's very short, but it's the start of a network. So building on my asks, we need to make sure that there's public support and we drive through these changes in the good of air quality, in the good of social cohesion and all the other benefits that cycling brings, and selling those benefits as advocates for this. But also it can only be these big, bold, segregated cycle lanes. They're expensive, they're short in some instances, and they can only be part of the solution. So it's really important that we also very quickly explore low traffic neighbourhoods, which I'm told are in the Coventry plan that's been adopted, but also are a favourite from government at the moment. They provide, for people who don't know, they provide what's called modal filters that they stop rat running effectively. So a great sell for residents. They'll, you know, potentially save on the council budget of speed bumps and signage because they create low traffic neighbourhoods. And that can create the kind of experiences we've seen in areas like Waltham Forest, that people want to cycle and want to walk because they've got low speeds, they've got low traffic, children can play outside, and residents can do those little journeys to the shops, etc. And you start to build a cycle network through these. So my ask is to build a network and a review of the network as well, which is where the LC whip comes into play. So Coventry, I believe, is, and John will be able to advise on the timeline for this, but is developing what's called an LC whip, a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which is the government's preferred method of saying this is our city's plan for cycling. And when only pockets of funding come in, that will allow Coventry City Council to go, oh, we'll have some of that and we'll start to build, not asking what it's for, but, you know, or making stuff up but to get the bid, but actually going, this is the money we're going to use to build our network. And that work is in progress, but I would really encourage that to be released very promptly and worked on as fast as possible, because we know that the narrative and the mood music from government at the moment is that active travel is going to remain on the agenda, and I believe it is going to continue to be funded. So Coventry needs to have a bona fide plan, as other cities have had, to be able to say, we want that money and this is exactly what we're going to do with it. And I guess finally that involves, I know we've got a couple of councillors on today, but I think that involves a real step change in public political will and boldness, I would say, for cycling. So there isn't a whole great deal of public support for cycling and walking. It's not that there's not support equally, but you know when you go into an area like Leicester, or you go into somewhere like Hackney or Waltham Forest in London, when it's a #1 council priority to deliver cycling and walking schemes for all the reasons we've outlined, we need to deliver that kind of change, and we need to get that from political will. And one of the things we can do as a group is provide what I describe as political cover for politicians and, you know, councillors, so that cycling is seen as a safe thing to back. You know, there's not, every cycling scheme doesn't need to have an angry resident sat on the paper looking miserable. We need to sell the benefits and sell how this benefits the communities, and that's something I think as a group with our experience we can do, and also explain these benefits to councillors and show that there is that will. Because my experience of dealing with John and his team is, you know, of course we can always say you need to do more, and I would say, you know, you need to do more, But ultimately, it's councillors that set those priorities, and we need to show that Coventry is a city that wants improved cycling and walking. And that's probably about me done for an introduction. Sorry if I went over 10 minutes, I probably did.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, that's great. So I just want to echo, before I pass on to John, that we all want a holistic, citywide approach, and I think that sounds great. Like you said about the LC whip, so it'd be good to hear a bit more about that in the future. I think like behaviour change, not just from the council, but also we need to bring the community on board. So that's also a massive task that hopefully we can work together on. And yeah, councillors get on board as soon as possible. Okay, so I'm going to pass on to John.
Okay, thanks, David, and thanks, Adam, for the various references through the your introduction as well. And I think there's a couple of points there I would like to touch on. Clearly, there's an update on the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and just picking up Adam's point about funding announcements still being rated, and just to give people an illustration of the processes that we have to run through. So in relation to the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and apologies if I'll come across a bit frustrated here, the Minister stood up on the 9th of May to announce £250 million for measures to support walking, cycling, social distancing, for local authorities to implement those measures and for it to be done within weeks. So that was the ministerial headlines. That's grabbed the headlines. Not surprisingly, Adam and various colleagues, probably people on this call, have been coming to us, members have been coming to us to say, oh, right, what are we going to do with all this money? From that ministerial announcement, we were expecting the following week, normally the way things go, minister announces something, on Monday you get the guidance from DFT saying this is what you can bid, this is either what you allocated in terms of Coventry or the West Midlands, or this is the process for getting funding. It took 18 days for a letter from DFT to us via the combined authority, and it was DFT sort of delay in terms of getting that out, which was setting out, this is your indicative funding allocation. We then had 9 days to put proposals back to DFT. So it wasn't a case of here's the money, crack on with it. It was a case of here's your provisional allocation. Now tell us what you're going to do with it. So we were working up our schemes, but we then had to go back to DFT on the 5th of June through the combined authority, because we are part of the combined authority, and let the DFT know what we were going to do with the funding they provisionally allocated to us. As of now, 24th of June, we have not yet heard back from the DFT with the final allocation. So that's so far 37 days of the time since the 9th of May, we've been waiting on DFT to come to us. And it frustrates me. And of course, people who have got the expectation we're going to be out there putting pop-up cycle lanes all over the place using this 250 million or our share of it. But the process which DFT and central government put around that goes totally against the minister's spirit of delivering things within weeks. We're geared up to deliver things, and I'll sort of come to those in a minute. But in effect, that's the kind of process we're coming through. So, that's just a kind of, to put things in context, I guess. The minister might make an announcement and raise everyone's expectation that the next day local authorities are going to be out there doing something. The reality is, more often than not, we'll have a process to work through, which will take, in this case, a frustrating amount of time to come through. So that's enough of my frustration anyway. In terms of, I'll just sort of see if I can share my screen and give you a chance to see what. Right, so can everybody see the screen there? Nope, that's not come up, has it?
It was up, John. It was showing there. Sorry.
Oh, right.
It was working. Just no one wanted to say, and I didn't want to say either. Sorry.
Sorry, it didn't come up on my little bit that I could see it being on. Right. So in terms of what we're aiming to do, I mean, as part of the emergency active travel plan, it's very much around building on the opportunity we've got in terms of walking and cycling, but also more importantly, and despite the apparent relaxation of social distancing, it is about making sure that people have got the right space to move around our local centres and our city centre. In terms of the impacts of COVID, yes, we've seen a lot of reduction in car traffic, but we're now back to about 70% of the pre-COVID norm in terms of flows. A lot of that is obviously to do with people being back at work, but also the advice around not using buses or trains. Bus and rail is still drastically down, reduced capacities, or buses less than 20% of the normal usage. Rail was at 10%. So in effect, the government advice has had that impact, and that has meant more people walking to the local shops rather than going in the city centre, and more people cycling. And even in terms of the city centre, last week when the majority of shops reopened, city centre car parks were at 13% of occupancy. So still massively down on what you would expect as a normal use. But clearly we do have measures that we've put to the DfT, and once they give us the go-ahead and the funding, we'll be cracking on with these. There's also measures that we put in earlier as part of the social distancing, so the pedestrianisation of the high street, some works around the Burges, Hale Street, Trinity Street, Ironmonger Road, that area of the city. And that's really about achieving social distancing. Those went in as a fairly early measure to ensure that things happen there. But in terms of what we're sort of looking at, the green is very much focused on the city centre. It's very much about getting people across the ring road, getting people around the city centre, some closures in the city centre to traffic to facilitate easier cycle and bus access, and to ensure that traffic isn't circulating in some of the streets that we just don't want them there, because we need the space for pedestrians and cyclists. So that's the first tranche which we're waiting on the funding decision for. The second tranche, which will then be looking at things like the Falls Hill corridor, moving out to St Nicholas that side, works around the hospital, works around the University of Warwick. That will be dependent on what DfT decides to do about stage 2 of the funding. This is all funding for this financial year, but again, the further we go through the year, the less effective it is, because we put measures in place such as pop-up cycle lanes, and we're putting them in at a time of year when cycling is going to deteriorate because the weather isn't quite as nice as it is today. So, it is a bit of a, it's an opportunity, but we do run the risk, if we don't get the funding in sufficient time, of not being as effective as we might, just simply because we don't capture the cycling and the walking in the summer period, when it's most likely to be effective in bed behaviour. So there are those measures, the whole package of supporting measures as well around cycle training, helping people get their bikes back in fit condition, and also travel planning with businesses. So there's a whole raft of measures behind it, and that's all encapsulated in that central pot of government funding. So that's a sort of very quick snapshot of what we're doing. We're also sort of hoping to have an e-scooter trial underway later this summer. Again, that was part of the ministerial announcement on the 9th of May, that DfT would sort of allow some e-scooter trials across the country. Again, the first thing they did was launch a consultation on what the trial might cover, and we're now still waiting on the results of that. So it's now going to be later in the summer before we are able to do anything on that. And there's also more cycle parking going in the city centre. And as I think we've referenced before, Coundon I'll come on to in a minute, but we've also got the cycle route going out to Binley and ultimately the hospital, which has been separately funded and would be a similar standard to what's shown here, which is a screenshot from the Coundon scheme. And if you see Pete Howarth on the call, it's his screensaver, in effect, his background. So there's a lot of stuff happening. There's also obviously the roadworks in the city centre, the public realm schemes there, the improvements at the station and so on. And a lot of that actually will improve conditions for cyclists as well as pedestrians. So that's the EATF. I shall now just call up the Coundon one.
Mileage.
Is now joining.
No, wrong one again. So in terms of Coundon, I won't linger too much on this because we want to obviously give you guys the chance to sort of comment, but and I know there's some comments in the chat already. But basically it's segregated cycle routes, fully segregated all the way through to Norman Place Road in Coundon, running along Coundon Road, under the railway and into the centre. And obviously the detailed plans are on the that's probably just an SAS hospital helicopter going by, so apologies for that. But sort of, this information's on the website, on the Coundon consultation, and I encourage everyone to sort of view that at their leisure and put their comments in. As Adam alluded to, there's a couple of petitions on the go at the moment, one for, one against. But we see Coundon and the standard that we're looking at for Coundon as being critical to actually uplifting within the city. I think as Adam outlined, it's segregated facilities such as this which really make the difference in encouraging casual cyclists to become permanent cyclists and to encourage novice cyclists to actually give it a go, whether it's for commuting or for other journeys. So this is kind of the impression of what it will be like. So we are talking about a fully segregated, so space for pedestrians, space for cyclists, space for vehicles. I know there's been questions around parking and so on, which Peter's picking up on the chat. So yeah, it's sort of we'd love it to be longer. We'd love more funding to do everything earlier, but we've got to work within the funding we've got. So this scheme has been funded from the Air Quality Action Plan. The Binley scheme is being funded from the Combined Authority, from the Transforming Cities Fund. And clearly any funding opportunity we'll get, we'll be chasing in terms of getting more funding in. But, this is, it may only be 2 3/4 kilometres, but it's actually serving 4,500 households in terms of its catchment area. So from that side, there's a lot of people that could potentially use this route. And, it's really about, improving, ultimately active travel, improving people's health across the city. And we're well aware of the health issues we've got, the inequalities we've got across the city. And, we want to see these schemes, Coundon and Binley, as being the start of a much wider network across the city, providing key corridors and not just necessarily being on focus on city centre, but also being across the, the wider area of the city. I think so far it's been quite a large number of hits, almost 3,000 visits to the website. 670 of you downloading the plans, and we've had seen there about 750, 800 responses to date in terms of contributions to the discussion, comments onto the map that we've got, where people can load up their views, and direct emails, and obviously the 2 petitions which have collectively generated a further sort of 550 responses. And fortunately, I think for the audience tonight, a majority of those are in favour. So I say, conscious of the time we've got, so I sort of shall leave it there and pass back to you, David.
Thank you, John. So we want to get some questions in, a bit of discussion. but I just want to say sorry to hear about the problems you've been having with the Department for Transport. That sounds very frustrating, and I know that I've been emailing you, for updates. So I can imagine that's times, I don't know how many, and that must be very frustrating. So hopefully they'll be a bit more helpful very soon. And we'd just like to encourage everyone to sign, the petition supporting the cycleway. It's good that there are, different perspectives, and it's good to have these discussions, and that's good for participation in democracy. But we want to support John and his colleagues and everyone's efforts to have more cycle lanes. So please, everyone, make the time to sign that and share it. It might.
David, sorry, David. Just it's Adam here. Sorry, just a quick one on the DFT funding. I totally, and I'm also writing to DFT regularly and talking to them. But I guess other councils that have achieved stuff already through temporary measures are using their own council coffers at the moment. They're repurposing it. And don't get me wrong, for a minute, I do not think John is sat on a pile of gold coins at the council that he just doesn't know what to do with. But given these are low cost schemes, John, I just wondered what the likelihood is of front loading this, and then maybe a little bit of accounting backwards once you do get the funds, because I think it's agreed that time is of the essence.
Yeah, I mean, we've already been doing that in the city centre itself. So the high street measures and the areas around Burges and so on. So we've tackled the most critical areas there. And we have been, we're not waiting for the funding to actually get the design work done on these things, because there is a measure of design work. What we don't want to do is something like, just putting cones out on the network, because firstly, that won't give cyclists the protection, and it won't really send the right message out from my point of view in terms of protecting that space. Secondly, it would then cost us a fortune in revenue, because we constantly have gangs out there re-putting the cones back in place, because things will move easily. So what we are doing, whilst they are, we are looking at pop-up cycle lanes, as it were. They're not pop-up as in just putting cones out. We want to make sure that they are there and robust enough and safe enough for people to use, and that they're not going to get sort of just moved around by people thinking, I'll just leave those cones out of the way and then I'll just park on the side of the road there. So it's, there is an element of, sort of some design work needed, but, those schemes are mostly ready to go. It's just a case of confirming that we have the funding allocation from government, and also the funding process for the next stage, the second tranche.
John, I was wondering whether there's anything else we can do in terms of engagement, even given the restrictions that we've still got. I'm not keen to have public meetings anytime soon, really, but with the Coundon route in particular, anything, it's really good, the engagement that we've had so far that you described. Is there anything else that we could do, or maybe that we could work together on, I don't know, using online technology or something else? Or maybe we could discuss that in the future with Adam as well.
Well, in terms of, the experience so far, I think on the air quality and on the event tonight, this sort of event can work quite well in terms of having sort of dialogue with people. As many people sort of tuning into this as would you would often get to an actual public meeting, as it were. And at the moment, I would say that certainly during the period of the Coundon sort of consultation, which obviously runs through to 5th of July, I think it is. We're not going to be in the realms of having any kind of public meetings in that time span. So I think online will still be the way to go. We're obviously making every effort to get people engaged and sort of signposting them to the websites. The street news, which went out to 4,500 homes, had for his sins, it had Pete's sort of contact details on, in terms of people being able to go and ask for hard copies of the consultation material. or contact, make contact with him direct, and have a chat about various aspects of it. So I think we made every effort without actually having the length of a public meeting. And I think the response has been, far better than we could have expected under current circumstances. So I think, we welcome that.
Great. Well, maybe we can discuss that further after the meeting. So in terms of questions I've had beforehand and that have popped up, just as we've said before, all questions will either be or maybe both answered by John or Adam now or after the event. Might take a bit of time, not too long, but John's very busy and colleagues. But there are some questions for clarification, first of all, maybe about the Flozell route. There was a question about that. If you could very briefly, John, maybe just say a little bit about what's going on there. And also I've had a couple of questions about e-scooters, and that's cropped up on here as well. You mentioned it. Maybe just anything more you could say on that briefly, those two things. And Adam, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else. John, you go ahead.
Right, so just on Foals Hill, that's going to form part of Tranche 2, and that doesn't reflect that we're less keen on it, or we're less keen to do anything there, or there's less need to do something there. But it is one which has got a lot more to work through in terms of the issues, and it will be more expensive to put in. And when we saw our indicative allocations for Tranche 1, it was apparent that we couldn't do Foals Hill and do the other stuff in the city centre. So we've had to be mindful of that. We're very much looking to get Foals Hill in as part of phase 2. We've got the design work well advanced, so hopefully we'll get the final design over the next week or so. And in effect, we'll be ready to put that forward and implement something there. So we're very keen to do that. In terms of e-scooters, as I alluded to earlier, government sort of basically did a consultation on how e-scooters would work as a trial. For those of you who aren't sure, it's basically e-scooters as in the kiddies toy with an electric motor, push-along scooter, as opposed to the Vespa mod type scooter. So just to sort of clarify what's meant by that. EFT very much looking for a pilot project at various points across the various places across the country, and West Midlands is one of the key areas they're looking at, including Coventry. The pilot would almost certainly, we're waiting on the final guidance from DFT, but would almost certainly, in effect, restrict e-scooters for use on either the road carriageway or in cycleways. So they wouldn't be used in pedestrian areas and they wouldn't be used on footways. We're very much about sort of testing how they operate in a live carriageway and on a cycleway. There will be various management to sort of in terms of the IT controls around them. They can sort of geofence their use so that they stop working if you go outside a permitted zone. So we could stop them being used within the city centre itself. But they'll be used for people to get to the city centre. So that's the basis. But we've put forward quite a large part of the city potential trial, but we've got to wait and see what the actual final guidance is from DFT, and before we can confirm that scope.
I would just add that on e-scooters, that I think largely we need to, as green travel advocates, we should embrace them, but we should do so, as I know the council will, do so cautiously. I think we've seen lots of issues with e-scooters, also with dockless bikes, and them becoming a kind of additional clutter. I'm not I'm not anti-e-scooter, actually. I'm quite the opposite. I'm quite supportive of the measures, but because they'll normalise people-focused transport. So the idea is, I think, as James mentioned in the chat, of kind of almost mobility lanes versus cycle lanes. We start to reframe how people think about about kind of people-focused transport. You know, you can get roughly 7 times as many people on bikes through the same 3.5 meter road as you can cars, if you've got the demand for it. So starting to show people that this is for people of all modes, I think is important. The thing we should be wary of is that, and it will depend on how it's network planned by the council, is scooters have been known to cannibalize walking trips. So rather than get people out of cars, just get people to walk slightly less. So I think we need to, and walking obviously has loads of societal benefits and loads of health benefits as well. So I think we need to consider that, but I think largely we should be supportive of anything that basically it doesn't have people in massive metal boxes ultimately, and shows that there's a better way to get around for short journeys.
Yeah, okay, totally agree with that. So we're coming to the end of the time that we've got. It'd be great to have more time to discuss and have more questions, but I think, you know, if you haven't put your question already in the text box, make sure you do, because they are all going to be collated and hopefully answered in the next few days by John and colleagues. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, and our speakers for taking the time. I think that was really good. I think, you know, I agree with John that the Q&As are a good format for now. Obviously, it'd be good to one day do this, you know, in person, but there's also some advantages to doing it online. So we'll try and do some more, and hopefully we can follow up some of these things as well when, you know, plans become more detailed and other plans, you know, get funding, etc. Just to also say quickly that, you know, this is being filmed, and those questions, the video and the questions will be sent out to all participants, as well as anyone that's on the Coventry Green New Deal mailing list soon, as soon as, you know, everyone can sort that out. Please also have a look at our Coventry Green New Deal manifesto. I'll put the link up again now. And we are going to be sending a letter to all the councillors in the city to support that manifesto, sign up to it. And in there, you know, is the proposal about having a cycle city. So please encourage your councillors, MPs, to support our work, but also the work that Adam's doing, and to support John in making all of this happen. And I just quickly want to hand over to my colleague Tom Maidman, if he's still here, because we've got an event coming up on energy, which is more of a kind of training event. Tom, are you here still?
Yes.
Do you want to say a little bit about that before I sign off?
On the 4th of July, we've got a training session on the energy and the Green New Deal. I've put a link to it in the chat. It's held through Eventbrite in a very similar way to this, although it will be, I think, held as a Zoom event rather than a Teams. In essence, energy is a massive part of decarbonising our current carbon footprint. About 60% of our carbon footprint in Coventry, and a really important part of decarbonising that is understanding the system, and often there's a lot of misconception around that. So it's a training on essentially understanding that system so that you can hold our decision makers to account at all levels, and also make some changes in your own life that might help towards that. You don't need any prior knowledge. It's open to all. It's starting from a low level knowledge, and hopefully you'll end up with a level of knowledge at the end that you'll be quite confident talking about it. It's on July from 6 till 8.
So we'll be sending details about that. So everyone that's signed up to this will now be on the Coventry Green New Deal mailing list. So when you get the follow-up email with the video and that, you know, you have the opportunity to opt out of communications if you don't want to hear anything about what we're doing. That's fine. But if you do, we will also be sending out details of that event to come along to that as well. So just say thanks to everyone again, and take care, and see everyone later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John. Faye, are you gonna say